Okay, welcome to Unit 5, Acting Ethically in MG16, Personal Ethics at Work. So we're at our last unit for the quarter, and we could have had some scandalous fun all quarter by reading about people who have done bad things in the world of work. It would have been like taking a class in which all we do is watch television train wrecks like Jersey Shore or Honey Boo Boo. Entertaining perhaps, but educational? Not really. Reading about the experiences that others have had with ethics in the workplace can raise awareness about the types of challenges you might encounter someday, but we couldn't possibly cover all of the challenges you will encounter in your life. So then you might be left with a false sense of confidence that you are prepared for everything you might face. But how would you know what the right thing to do in those situations would be? How would you be prepared for a situation that we didn't discuss in class? Unit 5 is about expanding on the knowledge you have of the tools and techniques for acting ethically. Looking at exemplars of acting tools and techniques, examining reasons why we might resist acting, closing the gap between your want self and your should self, and crafting the strategies and scripts to effectively voice our values. The techniques for ethical decision-making that we have been learning are transferable to any situation you might encounter in your life, whether that be as a student, in your personal life, or in the workplace. And these situations might be ones like the ones you read about in the National Ethics Business Report, or ones you've never even contemplated. If you can recognize a moral issue when you see it, you'll be less likely to commit a wrong by, quote, accident. If you can then identify that you are the person responsible for acting, you can gather the relevant facts in order to run a test to determine if you're facing a moral wrong or temptation or an ethical dilemma. Once you've identified it's an ethical dilemma, you can use the resolution principles to help determine the best or most right action to take. These are all skills that you didn't have before this class, and these are helpful skills for you now as a student and for the future you as a professional in making better ethical decisions. Now that we've learned how to make ethical decisions, we have to learn how to act ethically, and it's not as easy as it sounds. Why would people, even people like you, trained in ethical decision-making, not act ethically at work? Well, for all the reasons we have already talked about. We may be blind to the facts that we are facing a moral issue because of motivated blindness, change blindness, indirect blindness, or an outcome bias. Or we may actually realize we're facing a moral issue because we've gone through the steps to make an ethical decision, but we're afraid to do anything about it, and so we make excuses not to act. Why would we be afraid? Well, perhaps we're afraid of losing our job or losing a friend. Perhaps we're afraid of sounding weird or different. Perhaps we're afraid of not being business-oriented or loyal. Whatever the reason, many people fail to act ethically and instead are bystanders to unethical conduct. Bystanders are people who stand by and do nothing, even when they know of something immoral or unethical or illegal is happening. This has been studied for years in the area of psychology. Repeated experiment after experiment shows that many people will stand by and not do anything, even when some atrocity is happening in front of them. So why does this happen with ethics at work? Well, we'll talk about some of this. In addition to this lecture, instead of the traditional readings, to complement the lecture, you'll go through the Giving Voice to Values Field Manual to find out. See TED for the link to that field manual. So actually, most of us know how we should act, but we don't often act that way. Instead, we act according to what we want, the outcomes, rather than as the people we want to be. The question is, how do we close that gap between our two selves so that we will act ethically throughout our lives and even in the workplace? First, we can reinforce our commitment to ethics. To do this, we need moral judgment and reasoning skills, which we've been working on developing all quarter, but can be further developed by 1. Being secure in your sense of self as separate from your professional role. This means that if you see yourself only as a salesperson, or a doctor, or an accountant, or a lawyer, and your sense of pride or identity is wrapped up in your professional role, you are more likely to compromise your personal ethics, standards, and values in order to perform your role. I see this all the time in students. They give up their personal sense of values to perform as a student, which means doing things that are actually even against their own values just in order to get the grade or outcome they want. You can resist greed or a winner-take-all attitude. Greed leads us to bad moral judgment. If we're only in it for extrinsic reasons, we will sacrifice our intrinsic values. Increasing humility. This is especially necessary at higher levels of the organization, where inflated egos get in the way of making good moral judgments. Inflated egos can fool people into thinking, I'll never get caught, or I'm not a cheater, so this isn't cheating. We can reduce the need to make judgments under time pressures. We've talked about how people do not usually make good judgments under time pressure, so resist whenever possible. If you do not have to make a decision right away, then don't. Take some time. You can rely on underlying moral principles for guidance. So related to what we've talked about, knowing what your values are and how you prioritize them. Then rely on them. Don't throw them away when other values compete. You can use the resolution principles to reinforce your commitment to ethics, to remind yourself that you want to do something that cares for others, or that brings the greatest amount of happiness for the least amount of pain, or creates the universal law or rule that you would like everyone to follow, or that simply allows you to be the type of person you wish to be. Generally speaking, we should favor the long-term over short-term when we're trying to be ethical. If we go for short-term gain over long-term pain, this usually leads to bad moral or ethical judgments. So basically, apply the strategies, concepts, and ideas we've been learning all quarter and practice them will help you reinforce your commitment to ethics. What else can you do? Well, you can talk ethically as often as you can. Talk about actions matter-of-factly in ethical terms, using the language you've learned in this class. For example, the facts seem to indicate that we are deviating somewhat from the truth of the matter. Or, this doesn't feel like an action we'd want published on Facebook. Or, I have the code of ethics here, and what we're suggesting is actually against company regulations, so we definitely need to think of alternatives. Or, as we talked about earlier this quarter, just asking, what are the ethical implications of this decision? We should engage in active listening. For example, we could say things like, can I just check in with you to see if I'm hearing what I think I am? Are you suggesting we could start up a side business using our work computers? Or, can you give me another example or illustration of what you're saying? I'm having trouble figuring out how this will play out in reality. We can also challenge other people's mental models or schemas. That is, how they view the world and how they make what they observe fit into what they already know or believe. For example, you said that the company only cares about profits. Well, I think you're correct in saying profit is really important. I don't think that's the only thing. Just last week, for example, our boss gave up some profit in order to give a nonprofit group a price break. I've seen multiple examples like that counter the assumption that profit is our only motive here. You could help people go through the other ethical sensitivity tests we've talked about. Would we want this exposed to other people? What would be the most the thing that our most ethical role model would do? What does honesty or trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, or fairness tell us to do? Does it feel right? Those are all things that you can do to increase your ethical communication with yourself and others. You can also remind yourself of why you are motivated to act ethically so that you will choose to prioritize ethical or moral values over others, even when they conflict with instrumental values like job security, career progression, wealth. This can be difficult to do, so how can you enhance your moral motivation? Well, you could seek out environments that reward ethical behaviors. If you want to be an ethical professional, do not choose to join an environment in which ethics is likely in serious deficit. How do you assess this from the outside? Well, if the organization or profession doesn't have a statement of ethical values or a code of ethics, I think you should be concerned. If the code of ethics really is about a code of compliance to laws and regulations, you should always be concerned. Talk to people who are already in that profession or organization. Do they think it's ethical? For the most part. There's always going to be people who behave unethically, but for the most part, you want to know that the organization or profession supports ethical conduct. Reward yourself for acting ethically. So although I said earlier that ethics is about intrinsics, we're human beings and we like to be rewarded. So sometimes, most of the time others will not reward us for acting ethically. So go ahead and reward yourself. Treat yourself to something when you've acted ethically. It's okay to feel good about it. Monitor your emotions. Some emotions positively lead to ethical acting and some don't. Monitor this in yourself so you know when you are less likely to make ethical decisions and act ethically. For example, when you're angry, depressed, or in personal distress. And finally, regulate your emotions. Once you are aware of the emotions that lead you to bad ethical decision making and acting, work to regulate them. Bring your emotions in line with your goals and adopt a more positive frame of mind. I have seen this in action. People who cheat or behave unethically because they are feeling bitter or upset will say things like, well, they should have done this and this and this. It's all their fault I'm acting this way. A wrong doesn't justify another wrong, but people who live in that frame of mind will often unethically. Others have said that if you publicly announce your ethical intentions, it's much harder to then act in counter to them. Finally, acting ethically oftentimes may require that you overcome active opposition and challenges, like those talked about in the Giving Voice to Values field manual. You'll get opposition and challenges from others who want to do something unethical or just want to prioritize instrumental values over ethical values. So you need to develop your skills. You can foster your moral character in order to overcome these challenges by developing your persistence, developing this internal locus of control. This means that you understand and accept that you do have some say and choice in the events and situations in which you find yourself. Rather than seeing them as happening to you, see yourself as part of them and that they're happening because of you. Also, be very good at what you do. The better you are at your job, the fewer oppositions or challenges you'll get to the choices you make, and the easier time you'll have convincing others to see it your way. Develop other related skills. Example, relationship building, organizing, coalition building, or public speaking. These are all needed to engage in ethical acting. Practice your systems 2 thinking. We mentioned this earlier. Slow down if you can. Don't make decisions in a rush. Go through all of the steps for ethical decision making rather than just reacting in the heat of the moment. Reflect on your own success at managing obstacles. Don't forget about the times that you've met obstacles and overcome them. Reflect on them. What skills did you use to overcome those? What skills would have helped you? How did you manage, and how can you leverage those each time you need to? You should also, every time you've made an ethical decision, debrief it honestly and with humility. You can debrief it with yourself or a trusted friend or colleague. These are all of these things will help you develop your ethical decision-making and acting skills. We can improve our chances of acting ethically if we believe that our choices are not restricted, that when we are facing a decision, we have many choices, not just a right or a wrong, or even a choice between 2 rights. But there might be that trilemma, that third option or fourth or fifth option for acting. And we can either stand up and declare our opposition to the offending action, or we can remain mute. But if we remain mute, then we are bystanding and we are not acting ethically in accordance to what we've learned this quarter. So to improve your chance of acting ethically, know that there are different ways of expressing values. You could be assertive, you could question, you could provide data, you could use persuasion, negotiation, or lead by example. Don't think about expressing your values as debating others, but dialoguing with others. Also, use the communication style with which you are most skilled and comfortable. If you're not comfortable being aggressive, then you don't have to be. You could be convincing without being aggressive. Understand the contextual pressures on acting and how you might resist them. There might be pressures that you're feeling from people around you to do something that you feel is unethical. Understand them, figure out if they are indeed real pressures or you're just imagining them, and then what you can do to resist them. And then, of course, practice, practice, practice. Develop your ethical fitness, and you might even need to get some coaching. You will encounter resistance from others when you attempt to act ethically. This is bound to happen. That Giving Voice to Values module, field manual, will help you develop the ability to respond to that resistance. Once you've learned more about the rationalizations you might hear from others, practice using levers to respond to them. Some levers could be considering both sides of the dilemma paradigm. the long term as well as the short term, the community as well as the individual. Other people may not be thinking that way. They might just be thinking short term. And so you can bring to the conversation, well, here's also the long term considerations we have to think about. And use the language that we've learned. For example, I hear that you're saying this will increase sales, but that's in the short term. What long-term consequences might it have? Use the language from the resolution principles. For example, I hear you saying that the majority would be happy with this decision, but is this something that we would want to become the rule for how things are done around here? Also, consider the cost to each affected party and how to mitigate those costs, even if you're not using the ends-based resolution principles. So maybe someone is worried that acting ethically will mean a smaller bonus this quarter, and they need that bonus to pay for their child's medical expenses. Encourage that person to talk to the boss about the moral issue. For example, I'm struggling right now with my child's unexpected medical expenses, and I'm afraid I might not meet the numbers, and I'm depending on that bonus to help pay those expenses. Can we talk about strategies that will help the company and myself and my family in my situation? You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to help if we just let them know what's going on. Look for ways that the right thing to do is a feasible thing to do. If you can pave the way for ethical acting, do so. Remove obstacles, create pathways. Our culture, structures, and processes should make it easy to act ethically and challenging to act unethically. Finally, counter the assumption that most people are unethical. A lot of people act unethically because they think everyone else does. Counter that assumption. Have facts ready to dispel those myths. So, we've gone through all 5 units. What do we know now? Well, we know that we should use logical steps to make ethical decisions. We shouldn't just say, I think or I feel, but this is what I know. Here's the facts. An ethical decision may not be the only decision. Sometimes we have to choose between 2 rights. It's not just about choosing a right over a wrong, but choosing 2 rights, like truth versus loyalty. Sometimes there's an action that resolves a moral issue and upholds both rights. We call that a trilemma. Fourth, making an ethical decision isn't enough. We actually have to act on it. And acting ethically can be difficult, even when we know it's the right thing to do. 6, we can improve our chances of acting ethically by giving voice to our values and dealing with the rationalizations that others will give for not acting ethically. And finally, we need to practice and build our skills in order to make ethical decisions and act ethically at work and elsewhere. So that's it for Unit 5. Next, you need to go on to doing the Giving Voice to Values field manual.